Welcome back! In this fourth video, I discussed the next two steps in post-structuralist discourse analysis. The steps we take after A, source collection, are B, reading and rereading, C, coding of subjects and predicates, and D, analysis. In this video, I focus on steps B and C, reading and coding the texts. Before starting the process of coding and analysis, I recommend you familiarize yourself with coding software, such as Atlas TI, InVivo, or MaxQDA. To be sure, this software can do many things which we don't use in PDA. It can quantify words and codes, for example, or make connections among codes based on their proximity. In PDA, we don't use these features, but we use software to organize our sources and codes in a way that makes it possible for us to work in a structured way. The programs allow us to upload the relevant documents and to tag parts of the texts, words, sentences, paragraphs, or entire sections with a specific code. The software makes it easy to reuse codes. The software also allows you to merge codes or to change code names. Later on in this video, it will become clear why this is useful. Before we start coding, we want to get a general idea of the discourse. Basically, we want to know what we will be coding. We want to get used to the style and language, but we also want to get a sense of the main message. We want to be able to identify texts that are central to the discourse and which are arguably more useful starting points for our PDA than those on the margins of the discourse. Let's take this text from Ahmadinejad's website as an example. Contemporary world's idols on verge of collapse, President. Please pause the video here and take some time to read through the text. As you probably noticed while reading the text, Ahmadinejad here is both quoted and paraphrased. He talks about the United States and the Zionist regime as idols on the verge of collapse. The Zionist regime is Israel. Ahmadinejad talks about the Iranian path as an alternative for both Israel and the US. He spoke about this on September 27, 2008 at the United Nations General Assembly. Already it is clear that Israel and the US are seen as Iran's main antagonists, or others. After reading other statements, we learn more about what Ahmadinejad means when he says on the verge of collapse, and when he talks about world arrogance, bullying attitudes, and the path of the Iranian nation. I would recommend to read and reread the texts until you understand these texts in their own context. Once you have a general idea of the discourse, you can start coding. This process consists of two steps: initial coding and focused coding. Initial coding focuses on the most important subjects in a discourse. It asks who is talked about and how are they talked about. In this example, the subjects are the US, the Zionist regime, world arrogance, world's idols, the UNGA, most countries, no one even in the US, the Iranian nation, and those who use arms and force. While going through more documents, codes become better defined. This is when you want to rename codes or merge codes. For example, in other documents, I found that world arrogance is used interchangeably with bullying powers and arrogant powers, and that this is a flexible term, which always implies the US, but may also include the UK and sometimes other European states. In the end, I merged these codes into one code, which I called the West. That I used the coding software Atlas TI made merging or changing codes a matter of a few mouse clicks. Sections which were coded arrogant powers or bullying powers earlier now were included in the code the West. While identifying subjects, I also identified the ways these subjects were talked about. This we call predicates or attributes. For example, arrogant and bullying for the West, and an alternative path for Iran. How exactly you want to use codes is up to you. You can make separate codes for subjects and predicates, so the West as one code and arrogant as another, or you can create codes which merge the two. The West is arrogant. There is something to say for either approach. In my project, I started out with separate codes for subjects and predicates, but later I got confused because I could not trace back which predicate connected to which subject. This is when I started to merge subjects and predicates into one code, such as the West is arrogant, the West is bullying. The first couple of texts take a lot of time to code, but after a while you understand what the main subjects are and you pick up pace. Your codes will have been merged into a somewhat stable list of codes. Some fine-tuning aside, you can focus on simply processing more sources until you reach the point where new material no longer contributes to your list of codes and predicates. This is when you reach saturation. For the subjects, my final code list looked like this. If you want to look at this a little longer, you can pause the video. To give an example of a code list for predicates or attributes, here is a list for the West. In PDA, we do not quantify. I made an exception in these lists of codes. The subjects or predicates, which appeared most often in the text, are on top. In my book, I call this salience. Salience is the centrality of a code to the production of meaning in a discourse. Arguably, salience has more to do with how a certain word or phrase is used than how often. After all, something can be said once, yet be highly salient. In the next video, we take the final step in PDA, the actual analysis of the discourse. And once we have analyzed the discourse, we can connect the discourse analysis to foreign policy and answer the research question. These final two analytical steps I discuss in video 5. See you there.